Well, officially, good afternoon and welcome to Lee Tesdale's Farm. On behalf of the Iowa Agricultural Water Alliance, my name's Andy Petersen, and I'm honored to serve as your master of ceremonies here for this afternoon's fourth and flagship event to celebrate a defining decade of the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy and of environmental stewardship and improvement across the great state of Iowa, specifically as it relates to Iowa agriculture. And we've got a great lineup of speakers, as you can see behind me, to help celebrate and also look ahead to what's next, as certainly there's been a lot of great work that's been done, a lot of changes that have been made, but there are announcements that are continuing to come about as programs get developed to change and improve on the success that we've been building. So with that being said, what do you think of what Mother Nature provided us in terms of this day today, huh? Isn't that amazing? I wish I could tell you back in January when we were having these first meetings and there was 1.5 feet of snow on the ground here that we knew specifically it would be this nice. But we absolutely appreciate your attendance here today. And while we certainly have a lot to celebrate, we also have a lot yet to do in improving Iowa's water quality and agricultural practices. So I'd at this point like to introduce our first speaker of the afternoon, a gentleman who graciously agreed to host our event, again, back in January, in the middle of planting season, spraying season, and everything else that we have going on, and here to tell you about his groundbreaking leadership and some of the practices that you see on display. Please welcome Lee Tesdale.
Thank you. Thanks. So Nick, Helen, and I are really partners here. This is a century farm in my family. We've been here at 139 years, and I guess you guys came from Norway too, right? So yeah, we came over in 1855 from Norway. But so Nick, Helen, and his family have worked with my family on conservation here for several years, and I'm going to ask Nick to say a few words about some of the things we've done. We started cover cropping, I think, 11 years ago, yep. And they were no-tilling before that. So we really haven't done any fall tillage here for probably a good 20 years, except for a little anhydrous application, I guess. But so Nick's going to say a few words about how we work together on the cover crops and the cropping system.
Like Lee mentioned, we've been working together literally as long as I've been alive. So we started our family's partnership back in the 70s or 80s. We've kind of jokingly called this the Lee Tesdale Research Farm because we've tried a lot of things for sustainability, and a lot of them have been here first. This was the first field that we no-tilled. We did our beans no-till here in 1995 first, I believe. And we were kind of thinking, man, is this going to work or not? And it turns out those were some of our best beans. And that kind of started us down a path of, okay, well, we can try it here. Lee's a safe person to try this with. And the no-till quickly became part of our operation. You know, we no-till all of our soybeans now. And then, like Lee mentioned, about 11 years ago, we started with the cover crops. And Dad and Lee at the time kind of made the decision, man, we want to try this. And this was one of the first fields that we really did it on. And we figured out a few things that, hey, this actually works. And we figured out a few things, hey, that doesn't work. And, you know, that's part of the cover crop journey and the sustainability journey as well, is you got to find the balance of what things work within your operation, what things don't work, how can we implement these across broader acres, and how can we partner with, you know, our landlords and our other neighbors and everything. And I think it's been a really kind of model relationship of how things can go. We've learned a lot. We've had a lot of neighbors ask us questions, so I think the impact to me has been kind of nice to see. It's not just Lee and us that have succeeded with this. We've kind of shared a lot of the learnings with neighbors, had a lot of questions, had a lot of field days like this. So to me, and it's a great example of what we can do when we kind of partner together like some of these things.
Right. Just one other thing. I will say that, so Helen's and I work together on the in-field practices. So we're talking there about no-till and cover cropping. And as you've seen, we do quite a few edge-of-field practices. We try to keep those out of their way. I do put reflectors down there on the on the control boxes, so when they're harvesting at night, they hopefully don't run over my control boxes. But most of the edge-of-field stuff is out of your way, and then the infield we work together on. And so one advice to landowners, please pay for the cover crop expenses for your renters. Piece of advice. Thank you all.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Nick. And that is great advice, certainly. And one of the things that I guess I heard and noticed in that conversation is that experience that these guys have has taken time. And of course, we get one cropping season a year, right? So in order to gain experience, it takes several years of trying some things. We're very fortunate that there are people like Nick and Lee who are willing to try some of those things, oftentimes at their own expense as early adopters, to help develop a model for the rest of us. And as we talk about a defining decade and the certainly landmark nature of the nutrient reduction strategy, it set into motion opportunities for some early adopters to try some of these things and get the ball rolling. And that gets us to the next speaker here. The ball is rolling to the extent that we have an exciting announcement as far as water quality projects go as these practices continue to expand. Please welcome the administrator for Polk County as it relates to batch and build today, Mr. John Norris.
Thank you, Andy. First of all, Lee, thank you for your leadership. Obviously, your open-mindedness and courage to make change. And systems change is what we ultimately need to do, so I appreciate that and your commitment to our environment. It's an honor to be with all of you today as we recognize 10 years since Iowa began our effort to do our part to reduce the nutrient load we are placing on our watershed, which threatens the drinking water supply of literally hundreds of thousands of Iowans in Polk County and central Iowa, clear down to the hypoxic dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. It was an imperative 10 years ago. It remains just as much an imperative today. And what will define our success is what we accomplish in the future. We have formed great partnerships on our efforts so far with IDALS and DNR, Polk County Soil and Water Conservation, NRCS, Heartland Co-op, farmers, landowners, and many more who recognize with us it will take all of us to fix this problem. I want to recognize John Swanson. Where's John at? Is he still on the hay rack? There he is. John Swanson has provided great leadership and technical knowledge, along with our team at Polk County Public Works, to partner with many of you to implement the first batch and build program working with landowners to treat tile drainage systems and reduce nutrient runoff. Through this effort, the program focused on targeting, improving efficiencies, a fiscal agent funding strategy, and simplifying the process for landowners for the installation of saturated buffers and bioreactors. In the fall of 2022, after just 2 years of the program, the county successfully treated its 100th tile in Polk County. In the previous 6 years, they had only done 5. So that gives you some sense of the pace of change that we're making and leading here under John's leadership in Polk County. And Polk County is also currently assisting with expansion efforts in neighboring counties, including Dallas, Boone, and Story County. Polk County is continuing its effort to improve water quality by developing new programs, including the Ag Urban Cover Crop Seeder Project, partnering with ag retailers and new equipment, with a goal in 5 years of 40,000 acres here in central Iowa with cover crops through that program alone. We also have the Wetland Wave. Sounds a little like a sporting event, but it's a targeted approach to constructing wetlands, and we have very aggressive plans for expanding wetlands here in Polk County. We've committed over $12 million from our ARPA funds for water quality programs, including our recently announced Central Iowa Source Water Resource Assessment, which is a collaboration of scientists throughout the state to assess and measure the progress we're making on water quality. Polk County understands that we are just a single county in Iowa. So if we have leveraged partnerships to expand and develop new efforts, we hope to see these successes continue to serve as an example for all Iowans that you can aggressively take action to address our water quality issues. Our efforts to date have been mostly remedial, the saturated buffers and wetlands, and we will need to make sure we get to the final solution, which is changing farming practices, so we end the point and non-point pollutants that travel from the farm into our lakes, rivers, and streams. Cover crops have been a good start, but we've only started. We're at about, 10% statewide? We know we have to follow the examples that Leah set and make that the dominant practice throughout Iowa, in addition to no and minimum till, for our soil health and our water quality. We should also thank taxpayers. They are footing the bill for a lot of this, while also paying for the increased treatment of water systems and the increased threat to their drinking water supply. So we need to, I guess I see these remedial efforts as really helping buy time while we work towards systems change. Over the past years, this past years of the nutrient reduction strategy, the rate and pace of change has to increase dramatically. Measuring practices has been instructive, but the only data that really matters is measuring the change in the water reaching our waterways, our lakes, and our public water systems and private water systems. The culture of agriculture and farmers in Iowa is performance. They get this. My dad used to sell seed corn. And he'd say, well, it doesn't really matter what the field looks like. To a farmer, it matters what is the yield. And that's what the public expects and the taxpayers expect. So we have to follow that lead. We have to measure and produce results. The practices are great and they're a first start. But until we can measure results that provide the public the confidence in the safety of the water and rebuild our soil health and change our farming practices, that's when we will have something to celebrate. We'll follow the facts. We'll follow the facts where they lead. We must treat the world as it is, not the world as we wish it to be. And then we must share what we learn in a transparent fashion, regardless of who it may upset or what are the political consequences. Iowa can be a leader on this. We've gotten started. Now we've got to be able to measure real results. Thank you.
All right, John, thank you very much. And we couldn't be talking about any of this standing here on the stage without you, John, and dedicated staff members to the overall cause. One of the things that John mentioned is that we're able to find that farming practices changing also leads to increased production, which being able to talk about it is one thing, being able to measure it is a completely different thing. That's certainly a sign of progress. And one of the guys who's been leading on those efforts for a long time as the only executive director of the Iowa Agricultural Water Alliance is up next. Here's Sean McMahon.
Thank you so much, Andy, and thank you so much, Lee, for hosting us today. But this is really a beautiful day to reflect on the 10th anniversary of the nutrient reduction strategy, which is Monday. And we have a lot to be proud of in the first decade of implementing the nutrient reduction strategy. And you heard about the practices that Lee has implemented right here on this farm. Whether it's the bioreactor, the saturated buffers, the prairie strips, the no-till cover crops, we've been scaling up these practices in Iowa over the last decade. In fact, Iowa now leads the nation in rate of increase in cover crop adoption. When the nutrient reduction strategy was started, there was only an estimated 50,000 acres or so of cover crops, actually just slightly before the nutrient reduction strategy started in, that was 2010 for that estimate. Now we have about 3 million acres of cover crops. Of course, cover crops are very effective at reducing both phosphorus and nitrogen, particularly if you're using rye, which is the most popular cover crop in Iowa. It overwinters. It's a very effective nitrogen scavenger. And it's been great to see that scale up. You know, we're at about 12.5% of the row crop acres in Iowa, you know, from just a fraction of less than 1% a decade ago. But we're not satisfied. We're going to keep the pedal to the metal until we get at least 12 million acres of cover crops in Iowa. Yeah. In fact, one of the scenarios in the science assessment of the nutrient reduction strategy calls for between 50 and 70%, or 12 to 17 million acres of row crops. Iowa leads the nation in combined no-till and conservation tillage. In fact, 7 out of every 10 row crop acres in Iowa are under that category. We need more of it. We need more farmers doing what the Helens are doing here, and the fine example that Lee is showing. And of course, that's been absolutely key in reducing soil erosion and phosphorus. But that's not the only phosphorus-reducing soil conservation practice that Iowa leads the nation in. You know, we lead the nation in terraces, in grass waterways, in buffers, in water and sediment control basins. So Iowa farmers have been making progress at reducing soil erosion since the Dust Bowl, since the days of the Soil Conservation Service and Hugh Hammond Bennett, and the first calls to reduce our soil erosion. More recently, in the last decade and a half, the focus has shifted to nitrogen. And we still have a long ways to go when it comes to reducing our nitrogen loss, but we should be proud of the progress we've made to date. In fact, many of the most effective practices at reducing nitrogen loss were invented right here in Iowa, like the practices we have on Lee's farm, the saturated buffers, the bioreactors, the prairie strips. We're increasing saturated buffers and bioreactors by an average of 650% per year. And companies like Heartland Co-op, the first company to have a conservation agronomist, which now has 3 conservation agronomists, we're reaching the middle adopters, the late adopters. We're also doing so much more with payments for ecosystem services, market payments from the private sector that can be layered on to those public sector payments. And we are about to see record levels of federal investment for conservation practices. So I want to say thank you to all the folks from NRCS and USDA who are here today. Many of the practices on Lee's farms were paid for through the Midwest Agriculture Water Quality Partnership led by IDALS and IWA. That's a $100 million project. It's the largest in the nation. It's already improved conservation on 4 million acres. So while there's so much encouragement from those examples, if you look at the innovation, the market payments, it's very clear that you ain't seen nothing yet. While we should be proud of the progress of the first decade of implementing the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, the best is yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And of course, none of this would be possible either without your great vision and networking abilities to help bring some of these federal dollars and also expert staff members here to the great state of Iowa, which is something that struck me as I was listening to Sean speak. And Mike talks about it often too, Iowa as a leader in conservation practices, and that's absolutely true. And one of the things that affords us as producers here in Iowa is the knowledge base that we're surrounded by. So I would encourage you, whether it's the secretary, whether it's Sean, John, Lee, Kirk, so many staff members here that have such vast knowledge of practices that and methods that could be used to implement practices on your farm. Take advantage of that. Talk to them. They're accessible. They answer questions. They answer their email. That's one of the great parts about being a producer in Iowa and an Iowa resident is these folks are so personable. And certainly that includes our next speaker, who is the CEO of the Iowa Soybean Association, and they are one of the founding members of the Iowa Agricultural Water Alliance. Also, he's a member of the Iowa Agricultural Water Alliance Board. Please welcome Kirk Leeds.
Thanks. I don't know if I've ever been called personable before, but is that a good thing, Mike? That's a good thing. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Again, Kirk Leeds, Iowa Soybean Association. Glad to be here. You know, the Iowa Soybean Association, I'm very proud of the fact for more than 30 years, we've been investing farmer dollars in trying to understand how do we improve the quality of soil and the quality of our water in this state. So again, I saw there was somebody here earlier had a T-shirt on about Iowa's NPR before NPR was cool. Well, the Iowa Soybean Association was cool on conservation research before it was the thing to do. And so I'm very proud of that. And through those years, we have learned a great deal. We have worked with farmers all across the state to try new approaches to attach water quality. We have a certified water lab in our building, and we test thousands of water samples every year with farmers who are in trying new practices, who are putting in these edge of field practices. So today, what we didn't have 10 years ago, what we have today is we have more data, more information, and we know that these practices work. We know that if we do these things, we will see improvement in the quality of water, and we will do a better job keeping the soil on the land. But we have a long way to go, as been said by several of the speakers. We know, John, we've got a long ways to go to get more farmers. And so one of the things that we helped establish a number of years ago was the Iowa Ag Water Alliance. And that's when the Iowa corn growers, the Iowa Soybean Association, and the Iowa pork producers got together and said, this voluntary approach to managing and reducing nutrient loss is going to take us coming together at a level we have not seen in Iowa agriculture for a long time. So we brought our staffs together, our boards together. We're putting farmer monies into this every single year. And as you heard from Sean, we have great staff at IAWA, but we're doing an incredible job bringing the private sector, the public sector, and farmers together to try to dramatically increase the adoption of these practices. So I'm very proud to be here. We have much work to do, but we have accomplished a lot in that first 10 years. So thanks everybody for being here.
All right, Kirk, thank you very much. You mentioned measurable results, and of course, we talk a lot about a systems approach to conservation. You have to develop the system, and none of those would be with us today without your vision and your investment way back when in the Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance at the Iowa Soybean Association, so we couldn't have done it without those fine folks either. You know, it's like Kirk's writing my transitions for me here because he mentioned public-private partnerships for the first time, and that's exactly what we're going to hear about next. Certainly takes time to develop those too, the great collaboration that has resulted from the nutrient reduction strategy. So please make welcome the VP of Donor Relations for the Great Outdoors Foundation here, Jen Cross.
Yeah, thank you for the very smooth transition. I really appreciate that. Hi, everybody. Over the last 3 years, we've had the privilege at the Great Outdoors Foundation in fundraising for Icon Water Trails. I'm sure many of you have heard of Icon Water Trails, but that is a regional initiative connecting 150 miles of waterways in central Iowa. Why is that important? The public-private partnership, again, transition, thank you, has secured more than $97 million in direct funding, funneling major dollars into water quality improvements and best practices for our region. Additionally, investments in ICON have been used as in-kind support for grants that leverage federal funding for landowners and farmers to improve water quality through voluntary conservation practices on private land. So far, $20 million in federal dollars has been realized through public-private partnerships co-led by IDALS and IAWA, all of which was invested in supporting rural partners and their efforts to improve their conservation infrastructure. This model is the GOF playbook, and that's why this playbook works. We've collectively developed a proactive relationships, upstream and downstream, public and private, rural and urban, to find solutions, remove barriers, and move the needle on water quality in a way that makes sense. A decade ago, leaders in our state took this first step in developing the nutrient reduction strategy, and that was just the beginning, as many have said here, the starting point for us. Since then, many more strategic initiatives, funding opportunities, and cross-sector partnerships have come to fruition, and more on the horizon, further demonstrating the dedication to conservation and water quality in Iowa. We stand here today with more tools, more resources, and more connections than ever, and cultivate collaboration. The future of water quality and the state is brighter more than ever. If you're interested in learning more about the work that we do or how recreation can serve as a catalyst to conservation, head to our website at greatoutdoorsfoundation.org. In closing, in 2021, the Polk County Water and Land Legacy Bond was passed with overwhelming support, more than 80% approval, indicating the most innate desire with Central Iowans to protect our natural heritage and steward the resources our region has to offer. I share this to affirm the efforts represented here today are in complete alignment with the sentiment of our communities. While this milestone is certainly cause for celebration, our work is not complete, and it pales to the comparison to the legacy of the work we will do together in the years ahead. Thank you to our many, many partners who are here, and thank you to those who decided to be part of this solution. I am confident that the next 10 years won't be just a duplication of the last decade, but an exponential output that reflects the ceaseless dedication and buy-in in each of us. Thank you so much.
Excellent job, Jen. Thank you. And it's exciting to hear about some of these partnerships and collaboration that has developed here since the nutrient reduction strategy was put into place. And to kind of wrap things up and talk about some of the exciting new opportunities that are out there, including I saw a cover crop payment that just got announced, as well as so many other things, is not only Iowa's outstanding agricultural leader, but also a corn and bean planter operator extraordinaire. Please welcome your Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Nag.
What makes me an extraordinaire? I'm a little concerned about that. This bean planter has still got some bean planting to do. I think that's what that means. You know, at this point, what I should do is say, ditto, let's go on and let's attack this next 10 years. But, you know, I can't just do that, right? I have to say a couple things. But look, first of all, let me start by saying thank you for being here. When I look around, folks who are here, I see a lot of partners, key partners. If you're going to keep tally marks on a word that's going to get used repeatedly as I make my comments, I'll tell you right now, partnerships and partners are going to be top of that list. Because that is what it takes in reality to actually get work done. And that is what we have been focused on the last 10 years, is not just talking about doing things, but getting work done. And we can stand here today and confidently say that there has never been more people, more resources, more actual work getting done in the state of Iowa than there is today. And that's worth celebrating. Now, 10 years, it's a defining decade, right? We're calling it's the foundational decade to what comes next. You've heard it. I love the commitments that have been made. I love we got you on record, everybody up here saying it's going to be a better next 10 years. Because it will be. And how do I know that? Because, by the way, at a farm, at a field day, the most important voices at that field day are the farmers and the landowners. And Lee and Nick and Mike, you said something that was so important that people need to understand. Did you do everything at once? Did you do everything that you're doing today from a conservation standpoint on day one of the day that you decided to get involved? No. And you heard Nick say something that was very important too. We tried a few things that didn't work because it is a testing and a trying and a demonstrating. And that's reality. You start. And it turns out that starting is one of the hardest things to do. And so every time we're at one of these events or we're out talking about what does it take to get a project off the ground, you know, I think of Polk County, John, as being one of the great examples of something that had never been done before. And it took a whole lot of people to say yes. Lawyers and accountants and leaders and administrators and our office and a whole lot of folks to say yes. Let's try something we've never done before. But the second time around gets a lot easier, doesn't it? And the third time and the 10th time and the 20th time. And so when we say that we can confidently believe that the foundational decade that we've just completed we'll see exponentially more in the next, well, it's because it works that way on every farm and in every city and every utility that's been working on these things across the state for the last 10. And acceleration is absolutely what we're talking about. You know, we should go back to the beginning. We will acknowledge the progress that's been made. This started with a science assessment at Iowa State University that said when you implement a practice, you see a corresponding improvement in water quality or reduction in nutrient loss. That made its way into a strategy document. By the way, both the science assessment and the strategy document have become a model for other states in the Mississippi region, and that's something that we can be proud of. And then that was followed with innovation that came, literally new practices that have been developed since the nutrient reduction strategy was launched. We've figured out how to optimize wetlands and develop new practices. We've also been innovative in the ways that we're delivering practices. You've heard some about it, the cedar down there, the partnership with various partners, including Heartland Co-op. You've got a Soil and Water Outcomes Fund, Kirk, that the Soybean Association and others are leading, about trying to demonstrate and prove out the market drivers around incentives. We've got traditional cost share that we just announced again here this week that you can sign up for. But we're even being innovative in how we're delivering practices, working with private sector, with partners, with conservation groups and wildlife and habitat groups. Here's the bottom line. If we're going to see the success that we must see in the next 10 years, the formula is pretty simple. It takes sustained focus, it takes more partners, and it takes more resources. And if you can bring those three things together, what you will end up with is more practices and more actual work getting done. And that's what we're focused on. That's what you're going to see in the next 10 years. So let's acknowledge what's happened to date, but let's leave here today thinking about what can we do? What can each of us do to take this to the next level? And I truly am excited to see what can come in the next 10 years. So thanks to everybody for being here. Thank you for every partner. The hundreds of conservation professionals who get up every day and go to work thinking about getting things done. The thousands of farmers and landowners and cities and businesses and utilities who have engaged in conservation work over the last 10 years, and the millions of acres that have been treated and impacted. Those are the things that I think about now. Let's go do even more. Thanks for being here.
Mike, thank you, of course, for your outstanding leadership and finding ways to say yes to operations that will continue to propagate the spread of these outstanding conservation and environmentally stewardship practices. Now, just a couple of other housekeeping items. There are hay rack rides. If you haven't yet been on one of those to the 4 different stations to see some of these practices for yourself, well, make your way over and we'll take you back there before you take off today. We also have refilled the water station with more water up there before you take off. And the cheese curds, yes, as Mr. Secretary pointed out here, a place that we have both been to several times. The cheese curds that are fresh with Cynthia and the Midwest Dairy crew over there are an absolute treat and a 100% Iowa-made dairy product to take with you on the way home. Everybody who's up here will also be available for one-on-one conversations. So if you have a question, why, as I mentioned, they're very personable, Kirk, and approachable. And any interviews that you may have as well. On behalf, again, of the Iowa Agricultural Water Alliance, Department of Agriculture, Polk County, Iowa Soybean Association, and all of the collaborators and partners that are represented here, thank you for taking some time out to join us here and learn about a defining decade with, as Sean said, the best yet to come.